Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I'm a few days into my new job, and I'm going to tell you about how I got here, as the podcast played a part in it, and it's a cool story. The whole saga started 8 years ago. I set up a meeting to pitch the diecutstickers.com crew to sponsor my podcast before I had released an episode. Their owner, Daniel, and his team took me out to lunch, and I pitched them on sponsoring 10 episodes. And after my pitch, towards the end of our lunch, I was asked to leave the table so they could chat without me. That was sort of awkward, but whatever. I came back to the table, and Daniel was like, "We believe in you, but we don't want to do 10 episodes with you. We want to do 52. I almost had tears in my eyes. Like I said, I hadn't put out an episode yet, and I already had a year-long sponsorship. That meant so much to me. And I should mention that I've known Daniel since 2002, when he started Die Cut Stickers, and K2 was his biggest customer, so we have a long history. But fast forward to mid-September, and Jerry, he's Die Cut Stickers' general manager, and he's the glue that ties everyone together at Die Cut Stickers. When he comes into town, we usually go out to have beers with a couple DCS employees. Nothing special or fancy, just fun. Anyways, this time, Jerry showed up with a surprise dinner and drink guest, Die Cut Stickers owner Daniel Dietrichs. We had some drinks, and Daniel asked me how life was going. And I let him know it was shitty, that my wife had stage 4 cancer, and we were losing our insurance, and I needed to pick up a second job so my family would have the insurance we desperately needed. I let Daniel know that my job search would start on October 1st. He was like, "Send me your resume, and I'll get it in front of people I know who are hiring for jobs," and that was that. We had a fun dinner, and then we went our separate ways. I sent my resume to Daniel the next week, and I said, "I don't expect you to create a job for me, but I'd really appreciate you passing this resume along when you hear of an opportunity." What I should mention before I get into my job is that Daniel is the kindest human I've ever met. He deeply cares about people, and he does so much good in this world. I've always thought that, but sometimes I wondered to myself if he could really be that kind or if it was all an act. Because I've never met anybody as kind as Daniel. That's no joke. And then, once I started working for Die Cut and had lunch with his dad, a dude who just built a library for people in need in Uganda, I realized that the kindness was no act. It's the real deal, and those traits were passed down from his parents. Anyways, on October 1st at 9 a.m., Jerry, Daniel's right-hand man, called me up with a job offer that included 100% insurance for my whole family. He told me that Die Cut Stickers has never done that for anyone before, but based on my situation, Daniel felt that he needed to extend that to me. I was blown away, but I couldn't accept right away because I had to test the waters. So I started sending resumes out. I did a couple of interviews, and I realized that any other job I could take wouldn't be flexible enough for me to keep this podcast going. And really, I love doing this podcast, and I need the income from it too. So the more I thought about it, this gig, Director of Outside Sales for diecutstickers.com, is the perfect role for me. So what am I doing, you ask? Well, I'm in sales for a company that I've worked with as a customer for over 20 years. I'm selling stickers, tents, table skirts, roll-up banners, vinyl banners, magnets, and so much more. It's pretty exciting as everyone I've ever worked with, from athletes to brands, need this stuff, and Die Cut Stickers is the industry leader, known for quality, speed, and being easy to work with. If you know me, you can expect a call or an email as I want your business. If you don't know me, I want your business too. And know that I'm not a commission-based employee. I just want you to have the best one-stop shopping experience for all of your promo needs, and I want to give you the service that you deserve. So my diecutstickers.com email is mike.powell@diecutstickers.com. Please reach out with any of your needs so I can be more than just a podcaster in your life. Speaking of podcasts, I have another great one for you this week with an absolute legend. I don't think I've ever had a U.S. skier who's won gold in Olympic downhill on the show until now. Tommy Moe's career was a roller coaster, especially early on, and then he achieved greatness. While I could go on and on, I'm not going to spoil any of Tommy's interview for you. All you need to know is that it's Tommy effing Moe week, and you can't get much better than that. Before I get into Tommy's story, I want to ask you to do a few things for me. Things I ask you to do a lot. First, please tell a friend about the show. It really does help things grow. So does sharing my social media posts and rating me on Spotify or iTunes. While all of that is greatly appreciated, the most important thing that I want you to do is listen to my sponsor ads and buy their products. I only work with the best brands out there, and they are Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Best Day Brewing, Stanley, and Thermic and Descent Socks. Now, it's time to talk with Tommy Moe. I'm going to start out with something way out of sequence, and in the mid-90s, race courses were being injected with chemicals, and the ski surfaces were almost like skiing on tile, and that had a crazy effect on skis. Edges would heat up and they'd melt channels into the bases, and in that time, ski techs would have to fill those channels with P-Tex. To do that, they needed blowtorches. Can you tell us the story of what happened to your ski tech when he brought his blowtorch on a plane?
Oh my goodness, yeah, poor Willie Wiltz. My ski technician was flying into Chicago airport, and he had some butane in his Zargus box, which is like an aluminum box that actually is airtight with all his tools in it, and some butane leaked. And as they unloaded his box from the airplane, the baggage handler threw it on the cart, and the thing exploded. And poor Willie got detained and thrown in jail.
Were you on that plane?
I wasn't on that plane, but Willie Wiltz, yeah, unfortunately, he was blackmarked after that for a number of years, and he got security checked up and down for 5 or 10 years after that.
So every time you went on a plane with him, it was like a total hassle because he was trying to fix your skis because they were injecting courses with chemicals, which created ruts in your skis?
Pretty much, like the skis that I used to race on during the Olympics, I never used again because there's so much high friction in between the base and the snow that it actually tears away the P-Tex next to the edges, or it heats up so much that it actually creates a groove and you can't fix them after that.
Man, that's crazy. And it sounded like one of the ways that maybe they settled the whole deal was, I don't know, you said he went to jail, but they also, like, the ski sponsors had to put like full page ads out in magazines and in newspapers saying you can't travel with flammable material. Do you remember that part of it?
I do. Yeah, that's for sure. They spread the word throughout the ski industry that you shouldn't travel with any butane in any of your boxes that you carry your tools in. And yeah, Willie just unfortunately was at the wrong end of the stick on that one. And yeah, the guy that was handling the box ended up claiming an injury, and it was just a super setback for my ski tech, Willie Wiltz.
Oh man, I didn't realize it was that serious. I didn't realize someone got hurt or said they got hurt. That's crazy. But that was just the way I wanted to start out the podcast. And now we'll jump into your life and times. And when you think about it, you're this badass athlete, but you grew up with a dad who may have not been an Olympic champion, but he was a badass and maybe even a hard ass himself. Can you describe who Tom Sr. was?
Yeah, Tom Sr., my dad, definitely was a badass. He grew up skiing in initially, he was born in Anaconda, Montana, which is near Butte, and it's actually like a hard rock mining town. Okay. And my dad's dad was a hard rock miner, and then my dad migrated up from Anaconda to Missoula and fell in love with skiing up at Snow Bowl Ski Resort. And then he went to smoke jumper school right there in Missoula and ended up traveling to Alaska in the late 60s. And back in that day, they had canopies that were more or less just like kind of old school parachutes where you jump out of an airplane and try to direct yourself near the fire. But when you landed, it was like a full bounce. Like you had to know how to tuck and roll.
It was like the saucer kind, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And Senior was, in his day, he was actually a really good free skier. He spent a lot of time up on Snow Bowl, and then we moved up to Whitefish, Montana, not long after. I think I was probably like 4 or 5 years old. And I remember being up in Whitefish in elementary school, just staring at the mountain, thinking I couldn't wait for my next chance to get on the slopes.
And he was also a badass kayaker too, right?
Tom Sr., yeah. There's actually a river up in the Flathead Valley called the Swan River, and there's actually a hole named after him. It's called the Moe Hole because he went in there with an old hollow form kayak, and this was when kayaking first came out in the late 70s, and he ended up going into this big hydraulic hole, and he got stuck in there, and it tore his kayak in half, and he swam out of it. And to this day, some of my friends go back, and they're like, yeah, we went through the Moe Hole, which is pretty amazing because it's been like 50 years since that hole was named. And my dad's doing great, though. He's 83 years old, and he's still just crushing it. He's had a long life, and he spends a lot of his time down in Mexico, but the old Tom Sr. is just a mint individual.
Well, when you won Olympic gold, and we're going to talk about that way later, but he wore like a full-length fur coat. And did he have a unique sense of style for like an Alaskan fisherman, smoke jumper, kayaker, ski badass?
Oh, for sure. My dad wasn't, he was in construction. So he built a lot of metal buildings throughout Alaska. And Tom Sr., when he came over to the Olympics in 94, he had this, I think it was like David Green, Master Furrier. There was a Timberwolf wolfskin jacket. So he had this on at the Olympics, and there was some hate mail that came out from it. I think PETA, we got some mail that was not so friendly.
All right. Well, your mom and your dad get divorced when you're like 2 years old. And from my research, it sounds like you and your brother live with your dad's mom in Montana while your sister went with your mom. Did you have a relationship with your mom and sister growing up?
Not so much, really. When I was, my parents got divorced when I was pretty young. And then I moved up to Whitefish with my dad. He got remarried. Joanne, my mom, and my sister Tara relocated to Sun Valley, Idaho. And, we'd go and visit them on the weekends up in Flathead Lake because my mom's parents had a house on Flathead Lake. So we'd reconvene in the summer and visit, but it was kind of a long distance relationship. But the memories that I had with my mom and my sister on Flathead Lake were awesome because my uncle Floyd was really awesome boatman. So we spent a lot of time on the water, but I didn't really spend a lot of time with my mom growing up until later on. And it was just the way things panned out.
And then it sounds like your dad eventually moves to Alaska in search of work. And is that when you guys end up living with your grandma?
Yeah. Well, in the late 80s, my father, Tom Sr., built a bunch of condominiums on Whitefish Lake, which were a little bit ahead of their time. He had like 30 condos that he developed right down by City Beach on Whitefish Lake. And he ended up going bankrupt and lost it all back to the bank. And then he couldn't find any work in the recession there in the late mid 80s. And anyway, he moved to Alaska. And so my brother and I stayed with his mom. Her name was Valerie. And she was awesome. She kind of let my brother and I do whatever we wanted and give us rides up to the ski area. And she was just like our mom. And then eventually my dad wanted my brother and I to come up to Alaska, and we moved up to Alaska a little bit later.
Okay, and we're going to get there in a little bit. But, how does skiing start for you? Is it your dad taking you up to the hill and you and your brother skiing with him in the beginning?
Oh, yeah. I can still remember being in between his legs, learning how to snowplow at the Whitefish Mountain Resort when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. And I have a vivid memory of it, just being up on the slopes. And, he's like, come on, hold on, buddy. And I'm like grabbing onto his legs, and we're doing the full pizza down the slope in Whitefish. And it was just an amazing time from that point on. And we pretty much skied every weekend.
How far were you from the hill?
Oh, we were about 6 miles.
So you could ski pretty much as you wanted. I mean, when you're in elementary school and stuff, are you able to go almost after school when you're that close?
We'd go up. They had Wednesday night race league on Wednesday night. So Whitefish Mountain Resort had night skiing. So we'd cruise up. My dad and his buddies all were in this night league, kind of a beer league. And they'd all go up. And my brother and I and some of our teammates, we'd forerun the course. It was just like a head-to-head parallel GS type thing.
Okay.
And we'd go up and rip around in the evening, and it was a blast.
So how old were you when you actually started racing?
I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, and that was with the Big Mountain Ski Club.
Okay. And then, are you like doing other things with kids on the mountain, like finding kickers and dropping cliffs and stuff like that? Or was that not a thing when you were younger?
No, that was a thing. Back in that day, there was no terrain parks. There was no man-made jumps. It was all just these natural hits on the mountain. And there was a couple that I remember. One of them was called the Big Drift. And basically it was this giant fault, which was the in-run was probably, I'd say 200 yards. And then it went into compression, and you went pretty much straight back up 45 degrees for about 100 yards. And this thing would send you in the air like no other. It was an amazing jump. And we'd go hit it in the springtime. And, some of the old school free riders were doing backflips, and, my buddies and I would hit that in the springtime, and we'd pretty much go up like 30 feet in the air, I'd say, and then land It'd send you up straight in the air, and then you'd land on a pretty steep landing. It was a unique jump. Unbelievably fun.
Gotcha. It sounds like there's a lot of room for error when it's a steep landing like that, so that makes it really fun.
It was awesome, yeah. And there was another one that we called the Ham, which was another in-run that had this really tight slot through the trees. And you'd zip through the trees, and then it'd send you straight up over this knob, 20, 30 feet in the air. And free skiing was a big part of my career, though, growing up, because, of course, we were racing and running like bamboo gates and plastic gates on the weekend. But most of the time, we were just out free skiing, having a good time.
And this is all like in the 80s. It was pre-Blizzard of Oz. It was pre-Olympic moguls. Racing was kind of it, other than the free skiing that you were doing. Do you remember the first time you saw racers on the hill and you were like, I really want to do that?
For sure. That's a great question. At that time in the 80s, they had a downhill race up at Big Mountain called the Doug Smith Memorial, and it was actually a downhill race. And I remember going up on the slopes, and they didn't really have any safety back then. It was more or less just hay bales.
Okay.
And I remember looking at some of the racers in their downhill suits, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. Those guys are just amazing. And I just remember those times as a young kid wanting to be a ski racer. And of course, at that time, Phil and Steve Mayer were on TV, and every weekend it was the wide world of sports with Phil and Steve and Ingemar Stenmark. And I just loved racing from the beginning.
Did your brother race as well? And are you kind of chasing your brother and his friends around the race course and the mountain? And is that what gets you really good, is being like the smaller kid following them?
Exactly. I was kind of the little runt punk kid following my brother and his buddies around, but I could keep up with them, no sweat. But, back at that time, we were up on the slopes, just hitting every kicker we could find, slashing the powder and hitting jumps. And, the lifts were slow, but the times were good. The snow was good. There wasn't really any cell phones or anything like that to deal with. So we'd pretty much just go out and have our way with the mountain. It was awesome.
And then when you got to racing, it's like the Idaho, Montana region, a place where I think there's a lot of talent. And when you were young and coming up, like, who were the guys that you were guys to beat in that world? Were there any names that we would know today, or back then at least?
Those races that happened back then, one year the U.S. Nationals came to Big Mountain, and my brother and my dad and I all ran. And I remember Ken Reed was there, some of the crazy Canucks, Steve Podborski, Todd Brooker, and those guys were kind of the racers in the yellow suits that were in the mid 80s. They were like some of the best in the world. And I remember just being in awe watching them race on a downhill track that my brother and my dad and I were all running. And some of those mentors from that era were some of the best.
I mean, you keep saying downhill, and you definitely did everything back then, but you're known for speed events, and slalom just something you did because you had to back then, but like GS and downhill were the shit that you really enjoyed?
I liked slalom back in the day. We had some GS races throughout Montana, and even when I think when I was 12 years old, we used to run downhill, which was amazing because a lot of kids now aren't able to run downhill or even speed events until you're like 14 or 15. But we were running downhill when we were 11, 12 years old. And we'd go to Showdown, which was up near Great Falls, Montana, and do a downhill. Then we'd go to Big Sky. We had a downhill there. But I raced slalom, and actually I was quite good at it at a younger age, slalom and GS, just because I just fell in love with skiing and just loved the fact that you were pushing yourself to the limit on the course. And it was, like you said, one of the only things going on. There was no real free ride movement. Most of it was just racing, and I went for it.
And how long until you were getting on the podium each week?
I still have a pretty good memory of one race up at Snowbowl, Montana, where I was kind of the young buck in the race, and my brother and some of his teammates were really good skiers also. But I came down, and I remember that I smoked them all, and they were like, "What? Your brother just beat us," and they were pissed, and I was all stoked. And it was just one of those times where I just had the eye of the tiger at a young age, and just wanted to be the best that I could be. And it was just that inner fire that I had at a young age that kept me going in the ski sport.
And, when you're racing every weekend in the winter, then summer comes around. Did you do the whole summer at Mount Hood kind of deal?
Back then, not really. I did one ski camp at Mount Bachelor when I was super young. It was like this Bob Beatty summer ski camp. So one of our coaches drove us over there from Whitefish in a Winnebago all the way over to Bachelor. And we stayed up at, I think, Bachelor right up at the Blue Lodge for 10 days and did a summer ski camp. And that was my introduction to summer skiing, which was awesome. And then after that, we went to Mount Hood quite a bit. Once I made the national team, we ended up training a bunch up at Mount Hood, and that was part of the progression.
Yeah, when you went to Bachelor, was it one of those camps where the pros are there and giving you instruction and things like that, like the camps of today where kids go and they get to be around their heroes?
I do remember the U.S. ski team being up at Bachelor at that time. I think it was Felix McGrath and Tiger Shaw, and they actually were super nice, came up and talked to us. There was another camp up at Mount Hood where Phil and Steve came and talked to the group that I was with. And I still remember those times just because they were mentors and idols, and they were willing to come give us some pointers and talk about ski racing and what it took. And that was pretty special at that point.
And were Phil and Steve, when you get to listen to them talk, were they like different animals compared to the Tiger Shaws and other people of the world? Were they like down home? I don't want to say rednecks because I wouldn't. They're like gearhead motorcycle kind of Montana type dudes, I would think, compared to a lot of the other maybe turtleneck type dudes. Were they like a different breed of skier that was kind of inspiring back then?
Yeah, Phil and Steve were definitely a little more rednecky from Wenatchee. They were just buddies because they traveled the world and they'd won Olympic gold and silvers and world championships. And I think Phil won like 27 World Cups. And those guys are awesome, though. They were just kind of buddies as brothers. And they were definitely a lot different, but like Tiger Shaw and Felix McGrath were awesome because they'd ride the lift with us and give us some pointers and keeping us all positive and stoked about skiing. And that's what it takes, is to have some mentors out there.
Yeah. Well, and this is all pre-snowboarding and pre-anything counterculture in skiing. Like there was a lot of turtlenecks, and I don't know if you fit in with that style of things, but when did you fall in with maybe a questionable crowd at home?
That was during my time in Montana because my brother and I, we were kind of hellraisers. We were getting into some booze and some weed when we were early teens, and it was just kind of normal at that time. But that was the reason that I actually moved to Alaska, is because I got caught partying and got kicked off the ski team at the Big Mountain Ski Club. And yeah, it was kind of a godsend in a way because I was off the team, and then next thing I know, I'm up in Alaska with my dad, and I thought I wasn't really going to be able to ski race again. But he's like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "I'd like to keep skiing." And sure enough, my dad supported me enough to where I was able to join the Alyeska Ski Club and straighten me out for a while. And that same season, I think about when I first went to school in Alaska, I was living out in Palmer, and I went to 7th and 8th grade out in Palmer, Alaska, which is kind of north of Anchorage, about 40 miles. And then when I was a freshman, they started Glacier Creek Ski Academy. And this is a private school that was boarding 25 athletes. And luckily enough, Chip Woods was the coach, and he recruited me. And I was lucky enough to go to Glacier Creek Ski Academy. And 2 years later, I made the national team.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break. And when the temperature goes nuclear cold, I don't hit the mountain without my thermic heated socks. They are the original heated sock and still the industry leader after 20 years. It's a total game changer. Trust me, if your feet aren't working properly because they're frozen, you're not skiing or snowboarding at your best. And I make sure that doesn't happen by always wearing my thermic socks. And this year, they're better than ever. Thermic's new Smart Elastic Technology heated socks are a world's first for heated socks. These set socks are a high-performance fitting, thin ski sock where the patented heat components have stretch rather than a big, cumbersome heat band and element. So they literally feel like you're wearing your normal favorite pair of performance socks. But if heat isn't for you, don't worry. Thermic has you covered with socks for winter with their athlete-tested and proven Descent line of socks. Some of you might be blessed with feet that never give you issues, but most of us aren't, and that's where Descent Labs comes in. They've engineered performance socks with the help of an elite athlete team to eliminate things like chafing and heel blisters in your boots when you're touring or splitboarding. For over a decade, the people at Descent have been making socks that are consistently the best thing you can put on your feet before you get out there. They have a distinctive locked-on fit that never seems to change. At the end of the day, Thermic and Descent socks are the go-to socks for people that know. Drop into your local boot fitter and retailer and you'll see what I mean. Next up, it's Elan Skis. And while I've been talking about Elan all summer, I've been keeping some information from you that I'll share today. The award-winning ski that started Elan's cult following here in the US, the Ripstick, is brand new for 24-25. Think all new molds, all new sizes, new widths, and new tech. I got to ski these skis last season, and I'll say, the new models are still lightweight, they still have a ton of pop, and they'll still make you a better skier. But these new skis are even more stable at speed, which will allow them to handle burlier terrain than ever before. While you get more out of the Ripstick collection, Elan was able to build them without making them more demanding. So Ripstick fits even more skiers than before. While I loved my original Ripstick, what I skied last year was noticeably more fun, and I know the cult of Elan is going to grow even more with this new collection. If you're a person that demos skis and you haven't tried an Elan yet, make sure you try one this year and you'll feel how fun these skis are. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, and if you haven't been hearing a lot about Stanley lately, you must be living under a rock. Sure, you used to know them for keeping your grandpa's coffee hot in that signature green bottle, and they still make that, but Stanley absolutely blew up in 2023, and everybody is still talking about them. I've been telling you about how incredible their products are at keeping your drinks hotter and colder than anyone else for 7 years now. I mean, they invented the category in 1913, and while they've always done well, the world now knows that if you don't have a Stanley, you don't have the best, and I love having the best. I personally use Stanley pint glasses every single day, and I swear by them, and my wife and so many others out there can't live without their Stanley quenchers. Recently, I've integrated Stanley food storage devices into my ski routine. Instead of buying $20 burgers at the mountain, I buy food and it stays piping hot in our Stanleys, and I end up saving at least $70 a week by not buying food. While that's cool, Stanley really has something for everyone, and you can check out all their amazing products over at stanley1913.com. Those are my sponsors. Now, let's jump back into the podcast. All right, so before we even get there, you're experimenting with things, but you're also killing it on the hill when you're in Montana, and I feel like brands took notice. And did you get sponsored by Dynastar when you were like 12 years old?
I did. I got sponsored from the rep Albert Arnault. He sponsored my brother initially, Mike, and Mike was at a junior Olympic race in Oregon, and Albert gave him his card, and he said, give me a call. And so Mike got a bunch of skis. And then the next year, he's like, do you know any kids that are up and coming and fast? And he's like, yeah, my brother. And so sure enough, Albert sent me a bunch of skis. And for sure, I think I got supported from Dynastar when I was definitely like 12 or 13 years old. They sent me 6 pairs of skis, and I was so excited I couldn't see straight.
And when you have a sponsor and I don't know if it's a contract, but you have a deal with a brand and they're sending you stuff, what does that do to your head? Are you like a punk kid? Are you fuck authority? Or are you just excited to be getting free shit?
I was just excited to get free shit. I was like, this is awesome. I think 3 pairs were used and 3 pair of them were brand new. So I came from a kind of a modest family in Montana. I didn't really have a lot, and I took care of my gear and was not spoiled whatsoever. We were kind of scraping by at that point in the mid-'80s in Montana. So once I got free skis, I was just elated.
And then you get in trouble. You get banned from racing in Montana and Idaho. First, how do you get in trouble? Like, do they catch you in the act?
Not really. It was one of my teammates and I, Brent Wilson. We went to a ski race. And we had some weed, and somehow somebody found it in our hotel room. And then they asked if it was ours, and we lied and said it wasn't. And then they saw us like burning one up on the mountain one day, and the coaches were just on to us right away. And the writing was on the wall. They're like, you guys are caught red-handed. This is over.
Okay.
I just remember my grandma driving all the way over to Great Falls to pick my friend Brent Wilson and I up. And it was just bad timing. And we were just dumb and didn't really know what we were doing. And sure enough, yeah, we were banned from the Big Mountain Ski Club.
And are you just thinking to yourself, like, my dad is going to kill me?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That was gnarly. Like, just the whole thing. I was like, I'm so busted.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Because, I mean, at that point, I'd already had a couple strikes against me. And in the end, it was just like my teammate, Brent Wilson, his dad totally gave up supporting him with his career. I thought I was done. And then I ended up going to Alaska and was able to get back on the Alyeska Ski Club.
Was it Dynastar, though? Because, I mean, you're really lucky that this all happened pre-internet, Because if the world knew, it might have had you banned everywhere, but that didn't happen. Did Dina Star find out, and did they like almost tell your dad, like, hey, man, maybe you can get him to ski in Alaska with you?
They didn't really find out.
Okay.
They didn't find out, but it was kind of a godsend, like I said, serendipity, whatever you want to call it, that I was able to go to Alaska. Because some of the parents with the club in Montana were pissed. They knew we were loose cannons, and they didn't really like our program. And I just bailed out of the Northern Division and then moved to the Alaska Division and had a reset.
When your dad puts you in a ski academy there and thinking about him doing commercial fishing and construction, I mean, did he sacrifice just a whole lot so you could go to private school and race?
Oh, for sure. He's like, when I first got up there, he was like, where would you rather be right now? Training with the club or working for me? And he made me work for him as a metal contractor, like putting up metal buildings. And so from the ground up, he'd like survey the ground, put in the forms for the concrete, and then we'd do the concrete and then the slab, and then go right to the red iron metal, set those. And so I was out there grinding at a young age, and he made me work for everything that I had. It wasn't just given to me. So kind of just gave me the ability to appreciate everything that I had. And I just took care of my equipment and really cherished everything that I had.
And just him making you work, just kind of put that work ethic in that you had throughout your ski team career where you worked harder than almost anybody?
I think so. I think that I had a couple really close situations where the tracks were going left, the road split. I could have went left or right, and that was part of the deal. Was I just was on the wrong track, and I needed to stay right and continue doing what I needed to do to get on the right track.
Well, we're going to talk about getting off the tracks again in a little bit, but we'll talk now about what's different about ski racing in Alaska compared to Montana. Is it the same thing, or is it just a totally different vibe when you get to Alaska?
When I moved to Alaska, I loved it right away because the maritime snowpack there in the Chugach Mountains is unbelievable. They get tons of snow. I grew up as a skier in Montana, and it's a great place too, with awesome snow conditions and a lot of it. But in Alaska, when I first moved up there, it was amazing because it was so dark that you'd actually ski under the lights, and it doesn't get light until 10:30 in the morning, 11 o'clock some days. So they'd crank up the lights in the morning, and then it'd get dark again at 3, and you'd be night skiing at 3. And the snow conditions are super crazy because it'll be powder on top, a little warmer snow at the bottom, and then even some rain oftentimes at the very bottom because Alyeska is right at sea level.
And did it take a while to get used to like just the long days and long nights there?
Oh yeah. When I first moved up there, like I said, I was living in Palmer, and then we'd cruise down to Alyeska on the weekends. And once I got to Alyeska, I fell in love with it. I was like, this place is rad. It's got like amazing terrain. There's glaciers all around the valley, big old trees and kind of a rainforest vibe. And right away, my brother and I and some of our buddies, when we were skiing there, we were hitting cliffs because you could just send it right off any 20 or 30 footer and land on your head or on your hip or on your ass, hot tub air it. And it was amazing.
And then when you think about what kind of kid you were, like, are you into punk rock, metal? Like, what kind of shit were you into outside of ski racing?
Well, at that time, it was the big hair 80s band. So yeah, we listened to a lot of like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden.
Maiden's playing
Metallica.
Here tonight, and Priest played here last week, and Metallica played here just like a couple months ago. All shit I like.
It's so funny because Metallica's like on their M72 tour, and they're all getting old, but they still just sound great. And it was funny at that time because I really liked Metallica and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, and that full like heavy metal rock and roll was it back then. And yeah, I still listen to it a little bit here and there.
And then outside of ski racing, skateboarding was huge at the time. It was probably the Bones Brigade era. Were you into that when you were in Alaska, like street skating in Anchorage or wherever you were?
I was. It was funny because my roommate, when I was up there, at least at the ski academy, Darren Mattingly was a street skater. I kind of skateboarded a little bit before I moved to Alaska, but we used to cruise down to Anchorage and we'd hit these parking garages. And I had the Bones Brigade or whatever it was, and skateboard wheels, and he was showing me like how to street skate, like doing acid drops off 4-foot concrete stairways. And we just rallied around Anchorage and skateboarded all the time. And I think it's amazing sport. Even my daughter now, she can go in the bowl and she drops into these skate parks and just shreds. It's awesome. I love it.
It's amazing how many parks there are now compared to what we had when we were kids. So your daughter's very lucky in that respect. But ski race wise, you did well enough to get the invite to the U.S. National Alpine Championships at Copper Mountain. And was that your first big trip for ski racing at that point?
I think that first year when I was 16, so that was my first year racing FIS. So that's when you start getting points.
Yep.
So that season, I remember I went to Utah for some Western Regional FIS races down in Snowbird, and I think it was Solitude, even Park City. So I went to these races, and I was bib like 120, and I actually skied pretty well that first season and ended up like in the top 15, starting pretty much last. So that qualified me for the U.S. Nationals, which were in Copper Mountain, Colorado. And again, I was starting like way back in the 60s.
69.
70s. Yeah, 69. I had bib 69, and I skied down, I think it was the NORAM downhill before the U.S. Nationals, and I ended up coming in, I think, 4th place.
Yeah, well, I think that first day you ended up in 6th place, but even with the shit course, everyone was like, Mo got lucky, he got a tailwind. Did that almost piss you off when people were saying that?
It did, because I had some skis that were women's downhill skis that were from like Holly Flanders or Debbie Armstrong, and the Dynastar rep was like, here you go. Take these out. These are going to be rocket ships. And I think you're right. The first race I started like towards the end, I came down the course and I had this really cool coach from Alaska at the time, Paul Cruz, and he was the University of Alaska Anchorage head coach for the Alpine team. He kind of took me under his wing when I traveled down to that race from Alaska. And he just told me, like, you got to set up on this turn at the bottom and you're going to be fast. And sure enough, I came down and got 6th. And then they were saying that I got lucky, got a tailwind. And then the next day I got 4th. So I had like 2 30-point results, which qualified me for top 100 in the world. So I made the national team from those 2 ski races.
So when you make the national team, is it like you're on the U.S. team, or are you on the development team, or how does that all work?
I was on the C team. I skied my way right under the C team.
Okay. And who's on the C team with you at that point?
At that point, when I skied onto the team, there was like, let's see, who was it? So I went to my first speed camp in Europe. So all of a sudden I'm on the U.S. ski team. And then I went to my first speed camp in Los Lanius that year, and it was with like Billy Hudson from Squaw Valley, Eric Keck, Todd Kelly, Jeff Olson from Montana, Kyle Weekey. We had a big group, and we went to Los Lanius that year, and I was so psyched to go to Argentina and ski that the first day we got there, it snowed 5 feet. Oh. We skied powder. We skied powder for a couple days and built kickers, and then it got really nice for running some downhill.
And then I read somewhere that you were invited to a U.S. camp, or you were part of a U.S. ski team camp in Alaska. And with that one, it sounds like you have this great opportunity, and then you were out in the woods smoking weed and got caught again. What's the story there?
Mike, you know too much information.
That's my job.
Too much. Well, yeah, so I made the U.S. ski team from those races in Copper, and then that next summer, I was up at Alyeska again, and I went to this Alyeska summer ski camp, and for sure I was naive and kind of dumb again, and ended up burning one with this friend of mine. And one of the coaches asked me, what were you guys doing over there? Or he asked the friend I was with what we were doing, and sure enough, he's like, yeah, we just smoked a doob. And that coach pretty much, he just called the U.S. ski team at that point and said, yeah, Tommy Moe's up here racing hell, and what should we do? And he hadn't really even called my dad at that point yet, but he called the U.S. ski team. And then, Bob Harkins, the head director of the U.S. ski team, sent me a letter and said I was on probationary U.S. ski team status.
And I can imagine your dad going from this proud badass to this pissed off badass when he hears about it. And this is at a time when parents were able to hit their kids. Like, you didn't get in trouble for that. When your dad hears the news, how did it play out for you?
It was not. It was just dark. It was just like, what in the hell is going on? I can't believe this. And I remember driving from Alyeska back to Palmer with my dad, just beat up. I was just like, God, how come I can't figure this out? And there was a learning curve on that one for sure. And that's the story that they kind of even told at the Olympics in 94, how Tommy Moe, American skier, was caught smoking pot and had to go work for his dad in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, and straighten the young man out after that. And here we are in Lillehammer. So, yeah, they love that story.
Yeah, I mean, and it's pretty much you're forced into hard labor on an Alaskan fishing boat, and your dad's like, hey, you should be skiing with the team in Argentina, but you're here with me, and this is going to teach you a lesson. Was that, like, fishing trip, like, the hardest part of life for you? Like, I mean, is it as hard as you read about?
It was pretty gnarly. He's like, once I got put on probationary status, he's like, we're going to Dutch Harbor. You got to work for me. And it was not on a fishing boat. It was back to that construction mode with the concrete and the metal building side of things. And I remember him looking at me and be like, where would you rather be right now, working for me or skiing in Argentina? And it just sobered me up so quick. And yeah, it straightened me out. Unbelievable. And then sure enough, the next season, I was back on tour a little bit, and I was put on probation just for a couple of months. And then I went back on the road with the U.S. ski team, and I was, 17 years old. And all of a sudden I was racing World Cup and getting my ass kicked against all these World Cup skiers in Europe. But it was valuable, that experience I got racing World Cup when I was 17.
Yeah, I mean, that winter you head to Europe with the team and you're like a child amongst men. There's like Doug Lewis, Mike Brown, Andy Chambers. Did any of those guys take you under their wing, even though you're like 17 years old? Did they kind of show you the ropes?
Oh, yeah. I think when I first went to that downhill camp in Austria, I remember I was with Mike Brown and Doug Lewis and even the late Bill Johnson. And we all knew who Bill was. He was the Olympic champ from 84. And I remember going into the lodge and Bill was in there, and he walked over and he's like, so Tommy Moe, are you golden or what? And I was like, no, Bill, but you are. I gave it to him right back. And he's like, just laughing. And oh my God, those were the times. And then I traveled with Doug Lewis and Mike Brown and Andy Chambers. And Doug Lewis was by far the best mentor, because he's like, Mo, this is what we're going to do. And you got to, look at the course from this angle, and, we're going to run this course a couple times and keep giving her speed as you go. And he's just a real consummate, super gentleman, nice guy. Took me under his wing. And even Mike Brown, too. We all had a great time. And because I was 17 years old and I was hanging out with a bunch of kind of early, mid-20s kind of studs, and I was a little intimidated.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm starting this out with outdoor research. First and foremost, when I signed on with OR, I knew there wasn't an outerwear brand on the market that performs as well as what OR has been putting out in the marketplace for over 40 years. That's what happens when you test your gear in the absolutely terrible, soggy conditions that we can get here in the Pacific Northwest. As we all know, days in the mountains are always more fun when you're warm and dry, and that's what people trust OR to deliver time after time. I'll tell you, on cold days, I live in my men's Snow Crew down jacket. This is hands down the warmest jacket I've ever owned. And for those standard Northwest days, I rock the Snow Crew jacket and pant, which keeps me comfortable. And it's one of those fits where if you don't see me ski, I look like a pro. Really, what's rad about OR is the style that they've been bringing to the table lately. While mountaineers have always sworn by OR's quality and performance, now athletes like legend Mark Abma, world champion Troy Podmilsack, and X Games gold medalist Zoe Atkin are making OR gear look cooler than ever. I've been loving OR products since I first bought my outdoor research rain jacket when I moved to Seattle in 2000. And I know you will too. If you want to be warm and dry and look cool this season, head on over to outdoorresearch.com and see what I'm talking about. My final sponsor is Best Day Brewing. And with snow season right around the corner, skiers, snowboarders, weekend warriors, tubers, sledders, snowbikers, snowmobilers, you get it. The doers of winter are starting to get ready to shred. And post-shred, it's all about après. And this year, do après right. Forget about the calories, forget about the alcohol, and forget about getting in trouble on the way home. Because with a beer from Best Day Brewing, you know you'll get all the flavor of your favorite beer without the alcohol. Whether it be the West Coast IPA, a hazy IPA, a Kolsch, the Electro Lime, or my new favorite flavor, the Natural Pills, you won't have to worry about anything but having your best day ever when you have a best day. Blind taste tests prove that you won't be able to taste the difference between your favorite beer and a best day. I mean, the only difference you'll notice is how good you feel in the morning, and you're going to remember what you did last night, which is almost as refreshing as a best day. So next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Best Day, or you can always buy some on Amazon or at bestdaybrewing.com, and you can thank me later. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Those guys are kind of one side of the team, and like you said, Bill Johnson's the other, a legend for winning gold and being great. Some would say an egomaniac who could be an asshole, but I don't want to shit on a dead guy. What was your take on that dude?
Oh, Billy D, when I first met him, I was just like, wow, this guy's, he was just like playing video games in the lobby of the hotel and chewing Copenhagen. And, he had kind of a big nose and kind of big teeth and curly hair. And he was just super brash. I remember he was getting in fights with coaches and he'd bring in like little ladies to visit him during the week. And it was just crazy. And he wasn't a very good example by any means. But he was there and he kind of had his own program. He had his own car. And so he'd travel around Europe doing his own thing. And then like Mike Brown, Doug Lewis, myself, Andy, we'd all jump in like this, Volkswagen bus and rally out to the ski area every day. And Bill would do his own thing.
What was the most ridiculous thing you ever heard him say or saw him do?
I think the craziest thing was one of the coaches, Gary Miller, told him like, Bill, you need to start skiing a little better. And Bill just went up right at him and told him to fuck off. And they started going to blows right in the hotel lobby.
No way. That's crazy.
When they had that to break it up, I was like, oh my God.
And does that almost teach you when you're that talented, you can fight the coaches and get away with it? Not that you would do that, but like they didn't kick him off the team, right?
No, I was just like so naive and young at that point. I'd never seen anything like it. I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
This is real. And Bill would be up there training with us and he was just on his own program, but an amazing skier at that point. I think it was 84. He won the gold. And then he was trying to make a comeback up before 88. And he crashed again like at 87 and had a major injury to his knee. So we didn't see him for a few years.
And was he really the first one to have their own program? Because over the years, the Bodies and the Darrens, I feel like they've had their own program and had their team within the team. But was Bill the first guy to do that?
He was. He had a sick Quattro red. And he'd pull into the camp in this rocket ship sports car. He'd bring in some little girlfriends here and there. And then after the camp, he'd just disappear. And we were like, whoa, where'd Bill go? He was gone.
He's a total rock star.
He was a rock star pretty much at that point.
Oh, man, that's crazy. So in 1986, you go to Junior Worlds and you're in the top 20. In 87, you go to Junior Worlds and you take 4th in GS and 2nd in the downhill. And when you take silver in the downhill, that's a big deal. But an even bigger deal is the World Championships in Vail. And first, was that the year that the Prince got decapitated? And do you remember that?
I do remember that. I like the World Junior Championships. You got all your stats right there, Mike. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome.
Yeah, I did get 2nd in Hempstead, Norway in the World Junior Championships. Major result for me at that point. And then I did go to the 89 World Championships in Beaver Creek, Colorado. And we were running this course on the Centennial side of the mountain, which is basically the front side of Beaver Creek. And they had this cool little like man-made feature called Rattlesnake Alley. It was like this half-pipe thing you had to tuck through, and it was kind of doily, but you could get up on the side walls of the thing. And then there was this last face that had 6 turns. And I guess maybe the King of Spain or something was up there at the end of the day after everybody was done practicing on the course. And they had the finish banner cable sagging because they were resetting the finish line or something like that. And the guy did ski down and get pretty much decapitated from the cable.
Yeah, it's so crazy.
Gnarly.
Yeah. And then you're competing against the best in the world. Did the Birds of Prey course exist back then when you were 18?
No, I think I raced that later on. That was I think the first year they had the Birds of Prey was 98.
Okay. And, I'm going to get on a little side note here just because I brought up Birds of Prey. But when you think about the gnarly downhills in the world, like what are your top 5 in terms of what you've done in your career?
As far as the gnarliest downhill courses in the world, number 1 is definitely Kitzbühel.
Yep.
Austria, Hahnenkamm. The first time I went there, I had a sleepless night. I went there when I think the first year I raced it, I was 19 years old. There wasn't very much snow in the valley, and they were helicoptering snow into the track. And outside the track, it was pretty much grass.
Huh. So you feel every
And
ripple?
Oh God, it was just super intimidated. I didn't sleep at all the first night. I was so intimidated. And then that same race was when Billy Hudson from Squaw Valley and then another racer from Vermont, Eric Keck. So we're at the top of the downhill the first day, and you go out of the starting gate and you go 0 to 60 in like 5 seconds, and you go off this thing called the Mouse Folly, which is basically like a big cliff drop with a pretty steep landing. And anyway, when you go off the jump, you have to be pointed exactly like 12 o'clock as your direction.
Okay.
And for some reason, Eric Keck went off the jump, pointed at like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, so a little bit to the right. And he ended up flying over the fence and landing in the trees and rocks.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, and he tumbled through the trees, and he stood up and said, "I'm alive." And his ski is still in this ski shop in Sun Valley. Curtis Baca has the ski, and you've never seen a ski so bent up in your life. It looks like a Z. It's like just folded and crunched and bent like no other. So this happens. Kecker's all right. He's kind of bruised up. And then another teammate, Billy Hudson, goes off the jump, does the same thing, flies over the picket fence, lands in the trees and rocks. But this time he kind of smacked his head pretty hard and had like a slight TBI, traumatic brain injury, and he saw double for like 6 months after that.
Oh, Jesus. That's pretty rough. So we don't need to go top 5, but I'd say top 3 because, I mean, if we're going to tell a story with each one or whatever, I think we should go top 3. What's number 2 in terms of gnarliest downhill that you've experienced?
I think the number two is, I have to say, Bormio, Italy. It's gnarly track. I know Darren's done really well there, and Bodie won it. And one year I went there and got 3rd place, and it's just like this super fast, high-speed downhill. It's a little bit intimidating because it goes in and out of the shadows. So it's super flat light, and it's just really high speed. The average speed on the thing is like 65 or 70 miles an hour. And I remember when I was there, I had a really good result, but it was just a mental approach because the last practice run, I'd been like, I don't know, like 2 seconds out. And I was like, damn, if I could just go a second faster, I'd probably end up on the podium or top 5 or something, awesome. And I just went for it in the race and ended up getting 3rd in the downhill. It was a major breakthrough.
Okay. And then your 3rd most challenging downhill out there?
The 3rd most challenging, I think, is the Birds of Prey in Beaver Creek, Colorado. It's just gnarly. It goes 30 seconds of super flat, easy start into like this thing called the brink where it's 45 degrees and you're just veering off nets the rest of the way down the mountain.
It's funny because you say super flat. I've been on that course and I never really thought anything was super flat there, but I am in no means an Olympic anything, nor a racer, nor anything like that. So funny that you would say super flat. But back to Vail Beaver Creek, before the Birds of Prey even existed, at that event, it's got to be huge for your confidence when you're at World Championships, you're 18 years old, and you get 12th at that event. I mean, does that just boost your confidence significantly? Like, holy shit, I'm 12th racing against the best people in the world, and I'm not even fully developed yet?
Yeah, that was for sure. Even to this day, I have like a little PowerPoint. I'll show people my Olympic runs and some moments in my career and that's one of them when I came through the finish line at Beaver Creek. And I was just a little bit undeveloped physically and mentally, but I was super strong and ended up having a great run and got 12th place. And it was like the best result for the U.S. ski team at that event. So I was pretty happy.
And then you come home from Junior Worlds at your home mountain a couple of months later, and people are putting out full page ads featuring you in the papers, and everybody is expecting you to win. And is there a lot of pressure on you? Can you start feeling pressure build when everybody's looking at you as the guy and you might not even know you're the guy yet?
Exactly, because I did do well before that. I think the year before it was the World Juniors in Hemsedal, Norway, and I got a silver, I think, in the downhill. And if you do well at the World Juniors, it gives a little message that you're probably going to be one of the next World Cup skiers that has a chance. And I think that year in '89, they extended the age 1 year, so it was up to 19 years old. Because when I was 18, the Hempstead should have been my last year, but then they extended the age. So I ended up, Alyeska hosted the World Junior Championships in '89. And definitely when I rolled in there, I was like, this is awesome. It's going to be at Alyeska. And then We show up, the weather's really nice, the track's perfect. I won like the first 2 practice runs on the course. And then the pressure set in. I was like, oh my God, I better win this because in front of the home crowd. And I still remember the race itself. When I went down, I just put too much pressure on myself and ended up kind of over skiing it. And I think I ended up like 5th place. It was
It's not a
disheartening.
bad finish,
No, I was pissed.
Yeah, so you're pissed off, but at that point, the U.S. ski team really doesn't have that much going on as a team. I mean, Tamara McKinney was the most notable and her career was kind of winding down. Did you have any idea that the U.S. ski team was like going to make you the guy?
They were putting all their dough in one basket on that one. But at that point, I was skiing pretty well. And then, that World Junior event was tough because I ended up getting 5th in the downhill. But then I kind of brought it around and ended up winning the Super G the next day.
Yeah, you did that. And then after that, though, the U.S. team, I mean, the media guide the next year, you're 19 years old and they have you on the cover. What's your reaction to that when you're like, holy shit, like, because that means that you are the guy when they put you.
Oh, yeah, there was some pressure. And again, like at 19, I still hadn't matured very much physically. I was still kind of a string bean, kind of goofy guy with a hockey cut and bangs and kind of mullet.
It's coming back, man.
Yeah, the mullet. And anyways, 19 years old. Again, I was racing World Cup in that season, 89, 90, and just getting my ass kicked. I didn't really know what to do because I thought I was going to do better at a younger age. But when you get thrown right into the World Cup, late teens, early 20 something, I was like 4 seconds out every race.
I can imagine that's got to be tough because like in ski racing, only one person can be the best and 3 can be in the conversation. And for your first few years on the World Cup, you're in the top 20 every week, it seems like, but you're not cracking the top 10 at all. Is that like really a tough pill to swallow? Like just not feeling like you're even close to being the best?
It was tough. It was really tough. Like with Billy Hudson and Kecker and Rasmussen and AJ and all those guys, we were there, like we were scoring a few top 15s every so often, but nobody really pulled it together until AJ did in 91.
Did it mess with your confidence that you couldn't crack the top 10 at all?
A little frustrating. It was definitely frustrating. When I look back at those times, I just was pretty naive and I thought that I could do it, but I just hadn't really matured physically. I was still only like 180 pounds, kind of gangly, and I was super fit, but I just didn't really have the physicality to maintain the tight lines on some of the turns.
And then thinking about being on the World Cup level, I mean, the goal is to win and be in the money, and I would think it's a dog-eat-dog world. And do other racers ever try to get inside your head and like mess with you? Does this make you think about things more?
Oh, yeah. There were some Austrians. I remember at the start of a few races, Armin Assinger and some of the Austrians are like, this course is no good. I do not like it. These jumps are way too big. And, they'd kind of downplay it. And then all of a sudden you'd look at the result and they were like top 3. So they were just, Austria is so nationalistic. It's like baseball or football in the U.S. And some of those guys you'd get along with pretty well. But there were some of them that were just very farm boy oriented, very just quiet. And then there were some of them that were just like outspoken and just cocky. And all in all, we got along pretty good. On the White Circus tour there, the World Cup, everybody was just traveling together and, trying to go from race to race. And there was not a lot of animosity in between most of the racers.
Who was your least favorite person to see each week and why?
I think it was that Armin Assinger guy. He was kind of an asshole. He was just like super cocky and he was drinking Red Bull at the start. And I was like, what is this stuff? And nobody knew what Red Bull was back in the day. And he was just like outspoken, saying he didn't like the track. And then all of a sudden he'd finish on the podium. But I traveled around and met a lot of really cool people. Mark Girardelli, Permin Zurbriggen, Michael Marr, Franz Heinzer, all those guys were just gentlemen. They were just out there racing, having a good time, and out there to try to get on the podium.
And then when you think about traveling to Europe and all the Euro travel, is it something that you're paying for? Does the U.S. team handle it? Or does Rossi Dienestar? How does that all work?
It's all, when I made the national team in 87, once you were on the A, B, or C team, everything was paid for, thankfully.
Okay, I don't know. Is it like that today, or do people have to pay?
I think it changed like 10 years ago. If you weren't in the top 25 in the world, you had to raise a certain amount of money.
Okay.
I think you had to raise like 40 grand or 50 grand if you were not in the top 25. But as of late, I think if you're even on the national training group, they got a little more funding. So it's more supported now from all the sponsors that they have, Toyota and USANA and all these different companies. And it's because it's so expensive. I mean, there's some racers that independently race and they travel around and go to World Cup, and it probably costs them a couple $100,000 in travel and expenses. Easy.
For like you and your family, I mean, did your dad go to races when you were coming up in those like lean years where you weren't really cracking the top 10 and paying out of his pocket to come see you? And was he out there?
Oh, yeah, it was cool. My dad would show up. He'd show up to certain races. I remember he came over to Scandinavia once for the World Juniors, and then he'd come over to Europe like once or twice. And then usually we had the U.S. Nationals in Colorado or somewhere in the West, and he would show up for that, which was super cool because as a parent, you get a chance to watch your kid race. And, I had my ups and downs as a young skier, but my dad was always there for me.
Was he a hard ass though? Like at the same time, like when you're not skiing your best, does he let you know it or does he coddle you or how does that work?
That was I think the 92 Olympics was kind of a game changer for me because I thought I was going to go in there and do really well and maybe get a medal or top 10 or something like that. And I just remember my dad, he was not very happy. He was just like, what happened? And I'm just like, thought I was going to do better. I skied like shit. And there was not a lot of love going on there. But he was kind of a hard ass, but at the same time, he wasn't like just grinding me all the time. He'd poke me a little bit and then I'd get pissed and then we'd move on from it.
Okay. Talking about the Olympics, I'll jump a little bit ahead to Albertville. I'm sure one of the goals is to make that Olympic team in 92. And I think the U.S. took like 4 men for downhill and GS. Was it hard to make the cut to get on that team?
I almost made it in 88. I think AJ Kitt made it in 88 and I was only 18. But that season 92, I think AJ was the first pick and then Rasmussen and then myself and then I think Jeff Olson. So I was like the third racer in line that qualified for 92 Albertville.
Was Reg on that team too?
I think, yeah, Reggie Crist, that's right. Reg made the 92 team. So I think we had 5 guys in the training.
Okay.
You can run 5 guys and then the fastest 4 qualify.
Okay. And how tight was that team back then? Because I mean, it sounded like you and Kyle were like best friends, but were you, Reggie, AJ, and all like everybody, like just a full on unit?
We were a unit. Everybody we'd go and play basketball in the gym or volleyball. And those times were so funny because we'd go and play hoops and work out in the gym, these little Euro kind of like schoolhouses things with gymnasiums. And usually every time we'd go do that, somebody would limp out of there with like a rolled ankle.
Coach is all pissed.
Coaches be all pissed, but we were like a unit. And of course, Reggie Crist, he was always late. We'd try to, okay, Reg, the meeting's at 7. You got to be here at 7. He'd show up a little bit late. Oh, what do you mean? I thought 7 now. And, but at that point, we all traveled as a team and it's like a frat house type situation.
I mean, you guys were spending 150 days a year together on the road?
Oh yeah. We'd spend at least that between camps. We'd start out like in June or July, go to Mount Hood, and then August, South America, then October, Europe, and then November, Colorado. And a lot of these camps are 10 days, 2 weeks, kind of pretty much. And then the World Cup season would start, early December. So there was a lot of travel, a lot of living out of your suitcases. That's for damn sure.
And then, while you guys are a team, you're racing individually and you all want to win. But since you guys are on a team together, are you guys sharing beta with each other or do you guys keep that to yourself on game day? How does that work?
Oh, we all watch video. Back then, of course, there was no cell phones. And so the coaches were all taking video with these big video cameras. And so whenever we were at a training camp in Europe or South America or whatever, at least every run was videoed. Then we'd connect that to the TV and then maybe look at the timesheet and watch the video. So, the guys that were skiing fast you'd get a good mental picture of how they were skiing. And that really helped lift everybody up to that level, hopefully, which was awesome because when you have like an AJ Kidd or Kyle Rasmussen, somebody's skiing really well, you watch that and try to emulate that.
Okay, and then on race day when you're going through training runs and or someone goes before you, are they radioing up to you saying like, "Hey, Kyle said on this gate, watch out for this," like just letting you know what's going on with ruts or anything else on the course?
Oh yeah, good point, Mike. The course report, like AJ was top 15, early 90s, and so he'd run really early. And so at the bottom of the track, we'd usually have like a team doc or assistant coach would be down there with a radio, and so they'd be like, "Hey, AJ's got a course report," and we'd all huddle around at the start, and he'd give us the wrap on how the jumps were, how the course skied, how fast was it, and that was super helpful.
So at that Olympic Games, you get 28th in Super G and 20th in downhill. And when you go into the Olympics like that, where you really haven't had that many great finishes, I mean, you haven't at that point, how do you go in with the mentality thinking that you are going to do that well? Like if you haven't done well before, what makes you think at the biggest race of your life, you're going to crush it?
There's just that golden chance that you could go out there and ski the run of your life. I think that's always the dream is for a ski racer. And like you said, I hadn't really had that many top 15s before 92, but I skied my way onto the Olympic team. And sure enough, I remember I was at the starting gate in Albertville, and this Canadian guy goes out of the starting gate, and I watch him wipe out like 4 turns into the course and blow his knee out. So there's like a course hold. He gets carted off, and then I jump on the track and skied okay, but it was just a nasty downhill. It was down Face Boulevard in Val d'Isère, France, and it was some new downhill that was like 45 degrees the whole way. It was gnarly. It was so steep and had these 270-degree turns on it where you'd fly into it at like 60 miles an hour and exit at like 30, and it was wild.
So
crazy times.
First year course where you guys just kind of have to figure it out?
Oh, yeah. I think we did race it the year before, but it was this course that Jean-Claude Keely designed. And before we used to race on the OK Keely side, which is where AJ did. He won a World Cup there in 91.
Yep.
And so the next year they changed it to the other side of the mountain, which goes right into town. And it's where they host World Cups to this day. And it's super steep, technical. I mean, intimidating. I'm lucky I didn't blow up on the thing.
But not in your top 3. And while your results aren't what you want them to be, what is the highlight of that games for you?
At that point, I think just surviving down the Boulevard face and watching like Hillary Lynn got a silver medal. But that 92 Olympic Games in France, it kind of sucked because we stayed up at the Club Med, didn't go to the opening ceremonies. Nobody did very well. Just not a really fun time. I mean, the French guy crushed it. I think the guy's name was Frank Picard. He came down and got a silver medal, and he was starting in the same area I was. And I was kind of shaking my head and kind of pissed and needed to rethink my future.
Well, that's a total bummer that you didn't get to go to the opening ceremonies and stuff like that, because I was thinking that might have at least been a highlight for you, but it's not. So I'll go with something that I've never asked anybody, but just popped into my head is, when you go to an Olympics, do you get some kind of awesome swag bag with all kinds of shit that you're like, this is awesome, or is there nothing?
Oh, it's a full on. You get checked into the Olympic hospitality suite with your ID and everything, and security. And anyway, yeah, you go in there and it's just like shoes, pants, socks, jackets, sport coats, scarves. I mean, sweatsuits, tennis shoes. I mean, you walk out of there with like a grocery cart full of everything that you think you need, and it's amazing. It's the coolest thing.
All right, so that is, I guess, a high note when you get all that, because that's before you even race. But leaving the games, you said it was an all-time low for you. It was kind of a rock bottom. And you know what? I'm not going to end this podcast on your rock bottom, because we have so much more to go through. And I think I mentioned it to you earlier that I think we should do a part 2, or else we're going to be on the phone for like hours. And
sounds good.
Yeah, so we can do a part 2. But first and foremost, I end every one of my podcasts with something that I call Inappropriate Questions. And
okay.
What I do is I get somebody to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And I was able to get another Olympian who was on that Albertville team with you. a guy who was late to my call to get these questions. So you probably know who he is because you mentioned that he was late to ski team meetings back a long time ago. When I was at K2, he skied for me, I guess. I was kind of a team manager and he didn't ski for me at all, but he had to answer my emails. And I'm talking about Reggie Crist, the great Reggie Crist. And Reggie has 3 questions for you. Are you ready for question number 1?
You got it.
All right, here we go.
Well, yeah, I remember back, what must have been mid-1980s, we were racing downhill in Bend, Oregon. And yeah, we were sitting there on the sidelines and we were watching Tommy's future wife rip down the course. And Megan blew up and crashed and bent her only pair of downhill skis. And fortunately, Tommy had the same sponsor and he managed to pull strings. And next thing you know, Megan had a new pair of downhill skis and won the race. And I guess my question to Tommy was, were you just trying to be a nice guy or did you have ulterior motives?
There you go. Were you trying to just get her into new skis or were you trying to get into something?
I had ulterior motives because Megan was dating Skip Merrick at the time. And I watched Megan grow up and she was beautiful and pretty skier. And I was trying to angle for some other activity.
All right, so that was your first maneuver into getting your wife to marry you.
That's right.
So it all starts with a broken pair of skis. I like it. We'll go into question number 2.
You know, Tommy is known for his, what we call Moisms. He has sort of his own sort of unspoken language. It's funny because it always kind of seems to make complete sense. For example, we're, inspecting, say, a gnarly downhill course. You're looking at, say, the camel jumps in Val Gardena, and you're trying to size this thing up. It's like a 200-foot jump going 80 miles an hour. And Tommy will pull up and break the moment by saying something to the effect of, I guess we got to break out the Sacagawea on this one. Like just those classic moments where Tommy's just sort of diffuses the situation with his, what we call Moisms. And I guess I was just curious, Tommy, what are your favorite Moisms at this stage of life?
There you go. What are your deep thoughts with Moisms?
Deep thoughts with the Moisms. I think there's always a few that come about, but the Sacagawea is a good one. Reggie's correct there. I think that's an appropriate Moism. Another one is don't let your meat loaf.
Okay.
And then we'll think of a third one here. I think another one that is appropriate is being able to send it, sailor. Don't be afraid. Like when I talk to my kids now, I'm like, go for it. Get out there and do it. Send it down the mountain.
All right, there we go. So now we're going to jump into your final inappropriate question.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the controversy was, but I do recall there being some interaction between Tommy's dad, Senior, and Bill Johnson after Tommy won the gold. And I don't know, maybe Tommy can remember.
All right, was there any conversation or interaction between your dad and Bill Johnson after you have the biggest moment of your life?
Bill was not in Lillehammer, but I think there was another moment where my dad was with Bill, and my dad said something like, he's better than you, Bill. He's got a gold and silver.
Did Bill react with like punching him?
No, he was just like, whatever, old man.
All right, well, that is Inappropriate Questions. That is part 1 of our podcast. And while I would have a nice long outro talking about your career, we are just in the beginning of your career. I mean, not really the beginning, but your first Olympics. We're going to leave it off when you hit rock bottom in your ski race career. And I think it's your first time skiing powder with your dad in Alaska when we get back on Monday, whenever we chat. So for this, I want to thank you for your time, and I'll talk to you soon.
You got it, Mike Powell. Thank you very much for the Powell Movement. Looking forward to talking to you on Monday.
So that was time with Tommy Moe. And while I would love to give you a long synopsis of Tommy's life and times, this was part 1, and there's no need for that yet. Plus, I'm just getting used to 16-hour days where my only breaks are to cook and eat dinner, and then do and fold laundry. But that's my reality right now. And you know what? I have 2 jobs that I dig, so I'm not complaining at all. Actually, I am complaining because for some reason, that makes me feel better. What will make me feel even better than that is when the snow starts falling here in the Pacific Northwest. and I can start heading up to Shred. While weekday riding is out of the question for me, you can bet I'll be a weekend warrior hitting places like the summit at Snoqualmie, Mission Ridge, White Pass, Crystal, and hopefully a bunch of the more smaller ski areas here in the PNW. While the mega resorts are fun, there's something to be said for the charm of the smaller places out there. So that's the podcast, and while I usually read a review of the week, I'm also going to skip that right now. And I'll just let you know that I appreciate the shit out of you listening every week, and I encourage you to get yourself dialed in for winter with products from my incredible sponsors who make this podcast happen. They are Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Best Day Brewing, Stanley, and Thermic and Descent Socks. Have a great week, everyone.